The morning Baron Selwyn Vermeulen Pendergrass struck me across the cheek with his riding crop in the center of the village green at Lower Westley, in front of 183 souls of every station from the rector down to the smith's apprentice, was the morning of the 1st of May in the year 1817, and the Cotswold limestone of every wall in the village had gone, by the time the church bell of St. Aldate's rang the 11th hour, from cream to honey in the pale May sun. I was 24 years old that morning. I was the eldest of the three daughters of Sir Almeric Marchand Holloway, 8th Baronet of Wesley Park, who had been confined to his bed since the second week of February, with the slow respiratory weakness that had been killing him, by my reckoning, for 13 months, and would, I was almost certain, finish its work before Michaelmas. My mother, Lady Cordelia, had died of the influenza of 1815. She had been 39 years old at her death. She had been, in her 39 years, a woman of small, steady dignity and considerable accomplishment in the small, careful arts of an English country baronetage. She had, in her own 21 years as Lady Marchand Holloway, brought up three daughters in a house whose income had begun to fail in the year of her marriage, and had not afterward recovered, kept the south front rose border in the small, careful order of her own grandmother, who had been gardener at the Bishop's Palace at Worcester, embroidered 11 sets of household linen and 43 of the seat cushions in the chapel of St. Aldate's, taught her daughters in the small quiet evenings of the long Cotswold winters the 7 psalms her own mother had taught her at the same age, and held the small steady rod of the family's spine against the slow patient erosion of every income-producing acre of the entailed estate by the dry seasons, the failing rents, and the cousin in Bristol, who was already, by 1814, sending letters of disapproval through the post-bag. The influenza of 1815 had taken her in 11 days at the upper bedroom of Wesley Park, in the small gray and cream room she had kept since her marriage. My father had not, in any of the 8 years between her death and the morning of the 1st of May, spoken of her in my presence except in the small quiet phrase, "Your mother would have known," which he applied at the supper table on no fewer than 4 evenings a week, to the matter of the moment, whether the matter of the moment was the seasonal accounts, the kitchen, the schoolroom, or the small steady refusal of any guest of standing to call at our gate. My sisters Honoria and Imogen were 19 and 17 on the morning of the 1st of May. Honoria was, by every account in the household, the steady one. She had a careful seamstress's hand, the patience of her late mother, and the small private hope, formed in her 16th year and deepened across the 3 since, that she might marry the curate of St. Aldate's, Mr. Edmund Allenby, the rector's nephew, who is a young man of 26 of perfectly sound character, and no income whatever beyond the curacy. Imogen was, by the same accounts, the bright one. She read German. She rode astride on those occasions when no neighbor was likely to see her. She had taught herself the rudiments of double-entry bookkeeping from a small treatise she had borrowed from the rector's library at the age of 14, and she had been keeping the household ledger with my father's quiet permission since the spring she turned 15. The household ledger, by the morning of the 1st of May, recorded against the credit side of the column of the unentailed remainder of the estate the precise figure of £9, 3 shillings, and a halfpenny. The credit side of the column had not, in the previous 9 months, exceeded £20. The estate was entailed under my father's grandfather's settlement of 1783 to the male heir of the house, a cousin in Bristol named Holcombe Marchand Truitt, who had not, in the 4 years since the entail had been activated, condescended to visit. The unentailed remainder, 80 acres of poor pasturage in the upper field, the dairy with the 16 Gloucester cattle, my mother's garden, the dower house, and the small carriage and pair, was, by my late mother's settlement, mine and my sister's. The unentailed remainder was, by the spring of 1817, the only portion of the Marchand Holloway property the family still actively held, and it was, by every account in our possession, mortgaged to the gills. The man holding the mortgage was Baron Selwyn Vermeulen Pendergrass. I want to set down, before I tell you what happened on the green, who the Baron was, because the rest of this account will not make sense unless you understand the kind of man who walks across a village fair at 11 o'clock in the morning of the 1st of May, with a Russia leather riding crop in his right hand and a particular intention in his head. The Baron was 41 years old that morning. He had inherited the Vermeulen Pendergrass barony in 1808, on the death of his elder brother in a hunting accident at Belgrave that the country had not, at the time, been entirely satisfied was an accident. He had married in 1811 a wealthy Bristol cousin named Cordelia Hartshorn Vermeulen, who had brought to the marriage a settlement of £42,000 and a small daughter, and who had died in childbed in 1813 of complications no physician of my acquaintance had been willing, in private, to attribute entirely to childbed. The Baron had, since 1813, lived alone at Pendergrass Hall 4 miles north of Westley, with a household of 7 hired servants and a small daughter Cordelia, who was now 9, and a country reputation that had progressed, in those 4 years, from the merely unpleasant to the reliably feared. He had, in the autumn of 1815, lent my father, on a single afternoon's introduction at the Wesley Arms, the sum of £7,400 against the unentailed remainder of the estate, in 3 loans signed on 3 successive days, on terms that my father, who was, even before his illness, no man of business, had not understood and had not asked me to read. The terms had become apparent to me in February, when I had taken over the management of the household after my father had been confined to his bed. The terms were that the entire principal, plus interest at 12% compounding semi-annually, fell due on the 1st of June in the year 1817. The total then due was £9,088. The unentailed remainder was, by the most generous valuation of the parish surveyor, worth £4,300. The Baron had, between the 2nd of March and the 28th of April, made me 3 separate proposals of marriage, one by letter, one through the rector of St. Aldate's, who is an honest man and was put up to it under coercion, and one in person in our drawing-room, while my father lay dying in the bedroom directly above it. The Baron's proposal was, in plain language, that I marry him, that he forgive the debt, that the unentailed remainder pass to him through the marriage settlement, and that my sisters be permitted to remain at the dower house through their majorities. I had, on each of the 3 occasions, refused him. The morning of the 1st of May, the Baron came to the May Fair on the Green at Lower Westley because the fair was an annual event of the parish, and because it was the place where, by every long-running social arrangement of the Cotswolds, the gentry and the village met on a single neutral square of green grass once a year. He came on his glossy black gelding from Pendergrass Hall, with a single groom riding behind him at a respectful 8 paces, and he dismounted at the southern edge of the green at 20 minutes past 10, and he handed his reins to his groom, and he walked across the green toward the stall of the rector's wife, where my sisters and I had been helping to lay out the white linen of the parish charity table for the past 3/4 of an hour. He stopped 6 paces from me. He raised his hat. He said, in the carrying voice he had when he wanted carriage, "Lady Verity, I should be most obliged in private of a moment of your time. I want to tell you what I felt at that moment, because the rest of this account will not be honest if I do not." I felt the small lift of dread at the back of the throat that was, by the spring of 1817, my body's reliable response to the sound of the Baron's voice in any setting. I felt the small, steady rod of my late mother's spine in my own back, which was, by the spring of 1817, my body's reliable response to the dread. I felt the small, soft hand of my youngest sister Imogen, which had been resting on my left elbow throughout the morning's work and which now tightened briefly. I said, in the small, steady voice I had inherited from my mother, in the pitch I had been using to refuse the Baron in our own drawing room 3 weeks earlier. My lord, I am occupied with the parish charity. I shall not have a moment for you this morning. Mr. Allenby the rector is at the rectory door. If you should wish to speak to me upon any matter, you may do so in the rector's presence, in the rectory, after the close of the fair. He smiled. The smile was the smile of a man who has decided that the next sentence is not going to be the one I expect. He said in the same carrying voice, but with a small steel laid into it, Lady Verity, I have come to the fair on a matter that touches the credit of your father's house, to ask of you a single signature on the document I now have in my coat pocket. The document is a quitclaim of the unentailed remainder of Westley Park, in consideration of the cancellation of the loans of October 1815. I have brought a witness. Mr. Hartshorn, the solicitor of Stroud, is at this moment at the Westley Arms, and a notary public. I have brought, in addition, a small carriage to convey you and your sisters to Pendergrass Hall this evening, where you will reside, with my daughter, until the marriage, which is the only respectable conclusion to this matter, has been celebrated. I have come to the fair because I am tired, Lady Verity, of the polite refusals you have lately been delivering me in private. I am asking you here, in front of these good people, in the hope that you will understand, with the weight of public witness, what is owed. He paused. He waited. The brass band on the platform finished the slow waltz they had been playing, and the village did the small, careful business of going quiet in pieces, the way a village goes quiet when something is about to happen that it does not yet know it is going to remember. I drew myself up. My sister Imogen's hand left my elbow because Honoria, beside her, had taken it. I said, in the same small, steady voice, audible now perhaps to 30 paces but not further, but in a tone the Baron had not previously heard from me. My lord, I have refused you in private 3 times. I refuse you here, the 4th time. I shall not sign your document. I shall not enter your carriage. My sisters and I shall walk home to Westley Park at the close of the fair as we walked here, and the matter of the loans of October 1815 we shall take up with such legal counsel as we may secure, in the proper venue, in the proper week, with my father's full participation if his health then permits. I bid you, my lord, a good morning. The Baron did not say anything for the count of perhaps 3 of the church bell's slow seconds. Then he raised the riding crop in his right hand. He raised it, with a small, careful motion that no man who has not used a riding crop on a person before performs without thought, and he brought it across my left cheek in a single hard stroke, the leather catching the cheekbone and the corner of the mouth, the noise of it audible to the eastern hedge of the green. I did not stagger. The mother in my spine refused. The blow burned. I tasted the iron of my own mouth at the corner. I did not lift my hand to the cheek. I looked the Baron in the face. He raised the crop a second time. He did not bring it down a second time. I will set down what came next plainly, because a number of versions of it have, in the 7 months since, been in circulation in the Cotswolds, and the versions are all wrong in the same direction. A man came out of the small crowd at the edge of the rectory's table pavilion at a walk. That was not a hurry, but was not a stroll. He was perhaps 35 years old. He was an inch over 6 feet. He wore a perfectly cut dark charcoal superfine wool double-breasted tailcoat, a buff casimere waistcoat embroidered at the lapel with a single thread of dark green, a high starched white linen cravat in a mathematical knot, fitted dove-gray wool pantaloons, polished black Hessian boots with the slim red welt at the heel, kid leather riding gloves, a black wool cloak lined in green silk thrown back over one shoulder, a slim Malacca walking stick with a silver lion's head pommel in his left hand. He had a small black mourning band on the upper left arm. He had a single thin white scar running from the upper lip to the right corner of the jaw. He had iron-gray eyes that were neither cold nor warm, but were the deepest and steadiest eyes I had ever seen in a man under 50. He came up to the Baron's right shoulder before the Baron had quite finished raising the crop the second time. He laid his right hand on the Baron's right wrist where it was raised. He turned his eyes from the Baron to the Baron's hand and back again. He said, in a quiet voice that I am told everyone within 20 paces of the rectory pavilion heard with absolute clarity, "My lord, the lady has refused you. You will lower the crop. You will not raise it to her or to any other woman in this parish, in my presence again." The Baron looked at the man at his shoulder. The Baron, for the count of perhaps 2 of the church bell's slow seconds, did not recognize him. Then the Baron's pale, florid skin went the color of old plaster. He said, in a voice that had gone, in those 2 seconds, from contempt to the small clean fear he had not, in 9 years of being a baron, in his own assessment, ever been required to feel, Wadebridge. The man with the iron-gray eyes nodded once, without taking his hand off the Baron's wrist. He said, in the same quiet voice, "Vermeulen Pendergrass, you will, in addition, apologize to Lady Verity." Aloud. Now. The Baron's mouth worked. Nothing came out of it. The man with the iron-gray eyes waited the length of 3 of the church bell's slow seconds. Then he tightened his grip on the Baron's wrist, and the Baron's pale, watery blue eyes widened, and the riding crop came out of the Baron's hand and fell, in a soft, small clatter, on the dusty grass between his glossy, black-topped, tan-leather riding boots. The man with the iron-gray eyes, with no further movement of his arm except the tightening, broke the Baron's right forearm at a point 8 inches above the wrist. The sound of it was a single, soft, quiet snap, the sort of sound a hazel switch makes when a child snaps it across a knee. The Baron made a short, high noise, not a scream, but the small, involuntary noise a 41-year-old man makes when he has not previously been broken by another man with no visible exertion in the center of a village green at 11 o'clock in the morning of the 1st of May. He did not fall. The man with the iron-gray eyes was, in fact, partially holding him up by the wrist that had broken, with a small, careful adjustment of his own grip. The man with the iron-gray eyes turned his head, calmly, to the rector's pavilion, where Mr. Allenby was standing now, with his mouth open. The man with the iron-gray eyes said, in the same quiet voice, in a tone that the village would tell its grandchildren about, "Mr. Allenby, the Baron has injured himself. Be so good as to send your boy to fetch Dr. Pendergrove, and to fetch a constable, and to fetch the magistrate. We have, at this fair, an assault to record." He turned back to me. He took off his hat. He held it in his right hand at his side. He said, in a different and gentler voice, to me alone, but in the same carrying tone the Baron's voice had used 20 seconds earlier, "Lady Verity, I am Augustus St. Vincent." 8 days past, I had the sad necessity of being invested as the 8th Duke of Wadebridge, in succession to my late uncle Cyrus St. Vincent, the 7th Duke, who died at his seat on the 23rd of April. I have today come to Lower Westley to attend the May Fair as is the custom of my house, and to observe, in this parish where I have not had the opportunity to attend in 19 years, what manner of country it has become while I have been on the continent. I beg your pardon, ma'am, for not making my presence known sooner. I beg your pardon also for the language I am about to use to your assailant. He turned back to the Baron. He said, in a voice that had gone briefly very cold, "Vermeulen Pendergrass, you will be conveyed by Dr. Pendergrove's chaise to Pendergrass Hall, where your arm will be set. You will, by Tuesday, present yourself at Wadebridge Court, where you and I will discuss, in the presence of Mr. Hartshorn, your solicitor, and Mr. Tannehill, mine, the matter of the loans of October 1815. The matter of those loans is now my matter. I will be advancing, in your stead, the full sum due to Sir Almeric Marchand Holloway by close of business this Friday, and I will be cancelling the indenture of October 1815 at the same hour, by my own clerk, in your presence. I will be also receiving you, on the matter of the assault committed today in the public eye of 183 of His Majesty's subjects, at the Court of King's Bench at the Hilary term sitting of the next assizes. You will, between Tuesday and Hilary, be confined to Pendergrass Hall under recognizance. You will not approach this lady, or her sisters, or her father's house, in person or by post or by proxy, until that hearing has been concluded. Are we understood, my lord? The Baron, holding his broken arm at the elbow with his left hand, his pale, watery blue eyes brimming with the small, humiliated water of a 41-year-old man who has been broken in front of his groom, said only, in a voice that was not his voice, "Understood, your grace." The Duke of Wadebridge nodded once. He turned to me. He said, "Lady Verity, will you accept the courtesy of my arm to the rectory? Mrs. Allenby will, I think, have you and your sisters into her parlour for tea while my coachman is sent for. I will then convey you and your sisters to Wesley Park in my carriage. I shall, with your permission, take a few minutes' counsel with your father this afternoon, if he is well enough to receive me. I beg you, ma'am, to consider the rest of the morning at the fair to be at an end. I should not wish you to remain in the same square of grass as the Baron 1 minute longer than the courtesies of arrest require." I took the Duke's arm. I do not remember, with full clarity, what the village did between the moment the riding crop fell on the grass and the moment Mrs. Allenby closed the rectory parlour door behind us. I am told, by my sister Honoria afterward, that the brass band on the platform did not resume the slow waltz, and that the rector's boy did, in fact, run for Dr. Pendergrove and the constable and the magistrate in that order, and that one of the village women, a Mrs. Adelaide Yates Pemberton, who keeps the cheese stall by the maypole, had clapped a single time at the moment the Baron's arm broke and had been quieted by her husband. I am told the Baron was conveyed in the doctor's chaise to Pendergrass Hall by noon. I am told he did not look back at the green. If you have stayed with me this far, I would ask, before I tell you what came after the rectory parlour, that you take a moment to subscribe to the Duke's vow, because the rest of what I am going to tell you is the slow, patient unfolding of the 7 months between the Green at Lower Wesley and the parish chapel of St. Aldate's at noon on the 21st of December, 1817. And the people who stay are the people who came in carrying their own version of the riding crop on the green and the small, clean snap of the Baron's forearm in the silence afterward. Mrs. Allenby treated the cut at the corner of my mouth with witch hazel and a clean linen in her parlour, with my sisters seated on either side of me on the settle. Honoria was paler than I had seen her since our mother's funeral in 1815. Imogen, who is a girl who has never once cried in a difficulty, sat with her hand on my sleeve and the small, steady stillness her late mother's daughter had taught her, and she did not say a word for 40 minutes. The Duke sat in the rector's wing chair across the parlour with his hat held in his right hand at his knee. He did not look at me except when I addressed him. He spoke to my sisters, gently, by name. He had asked Mrs. Allenby for their names at the parlour door. He had remembered them, from the parlour door to the wing chair. In the order and pitch, any woman remembers a name has been spoken kindly. He told my sisters, simply, who he was, and who his late uncle had been, and that his uncle and my late grandfather had been at Eton together in the year 1753, and that the two families had known each other in the parish of Wesley for 64 years, although his own residence at Wadebridge Court had not, in that period, been continuous. He told them he had been 12 years on Wellington's staff. He told them he had been since Waterloo in residence at the family seat of his late uncle in Northumberland. He told them, last, that he had returned to Wadebridge Court 8 days earlier on the death of his uncle, and that the May Fair was his first appearance in this parish since 1798, when he had been 16 years old. Then he stopped speaking, and Mrs. Allenby brought tea, and we drank it. The Duke took my sisters and me back to Wesley Park in his carriage at 20 minutes past 1. He did not, in the carriage, attempt small talk. He sat across from me on the rear-facing seat and let me look out of the window at the Cotswold limestone walls, and the white-pink horse-chestnut blossom and the dust of the season's first dry week. And when we reached the gate of the park, he asked, before the carriage drew up at the door, whether I would consent to his speaking with my father for a quarter of an hour. I said I would. He sent his man up first to my father's chamber to ascertain the state of my father's wakefulness. The man came down. My father was awake. The Duke went up. I stayed below. He came down at 20 minutes past 2. He had been in my father's chamber for 18 minutes. He had, in those 18 minutes, advanced to my father, by a single signed bill of exchange drawn on Coutts and Company of the Strand, and presented in my father's hand on his sickbed, the full sum of £9,088, and had taken from my father an assignment of the indenture of October 1815, which he had then, in the presence of my father and our housekeeper Mrs. Tannahill as witness, torn into 4 strips and burned in the small fire in the bedroom hearth. He had, in the same 18 minutes, advised my father on the matter of the entail to the cousin in Bristol. He had advised my father briefly and accurately that the cousin had no entitlement to the unentailed remainder, and that the unentailed remainder, in the absence of another arrangement, would pass on my father's death to me and my sisters in equal thirds under our mother's settlement of 1811. He had advised my father, lastly, that he, the Duke, would be calling at Wesley Park at 3 o'clock on the afternoon of the second Tuesday, following the Hilary term sitting of the Assizes, with a particular question for me, that he would not press the question between now and that afternoon, and that, in the intervening months, he would take no view on the matter beyond the courtesy of a single brief weekly letter to Honoria and Imogen at the Dower House, and a single longer letter, of the kind a friend may send to a friend, to me at Wesley Park. He kept his word. He sent the letters. I read them. I read them. The longer ones to me, twice each. I read them with the small, steady rod of my late mother's spine in my back, and I read them, also, with the small, careful softening at the throat that I had not, in the 7 months between the 1st of May and the second Tuesday of the Hilary term, expected to feel and had not, in any of the previous 24 years, felt. The letters were not love letters. They were the letters of a 35-year-old man who had spent 12 years on the staff of Wellington, who had carried a pistol ball at Vittoria and a saber cut at Salamanca, and a small dent in the breastbone at Waterloo, and who had buried, between Vittoria and Waterloo, his elder brother, Captain Cyrus St. Vincent, in the storming of Burgos in 1814, and his uncle, the 7th Duke, 8 days before the May Fair. I want to set down briefly, dear listener, what was in each of the 9 letters, because the structure of the letters is the structure by which the 7 months between the May Fair and the Hilary term were, by my own quiet reading of them, slowly turned from a courtesy into a courtship. The first letter, dated the 11th of May, 10 days after the fair, was a single page on the heavy cream stationery of Wadebridge Court, bearing the small de Vincent ducal crest in the upper right, and was, by every internal indication, the letter of a man writing from the careful side of his desk. It thanked me for the courtesy of the Pomeroy parlor, asked after the cut at the corner of my mouth, enclosed a small bound volume of selected poems of the late Mr. William Cowper, which the Duke noted in his postscript, had been a particular favorite of his late mother, the 6th Duchess of Wadebridge, and asked permission to write a second letter at a fortnight's interval. The second letter, dated the 25th of May, was longer. It described, in the careful, slow prose of a man taking up the full width of his subject, The gardens at Wadebridge Court. The south parterre laid out by his late grandfather in 1773. The small physic garden his late mother had planted in 1806. The kitchen garden which had been, in the years of his absence on the continent, kept by the same head gardener, Mr. Holcombe Pendergrass, for 38 years, and the long pleached lime walk of which, the Duke noted, his late uncle had been particularly fond. The second letter mentioned for the first time his niece in Northumberland. Her name, I learned in the second letter, was Helena. She was 9 years old. She was the only daughter of his elder brother Cyrus, killed at Burgos. Her mother, the late Mrs. Cyrus St. Vincent, had died of childbed fever in 1814. Helena had been raised, in the 4 years between her mother's death and the present, by the Duke himself with the assistance of a Northumberland governess named Miss Avalon Yates Tannahill, of careful Methodist extraction, in the small, steady rota the Duke had established between Wadebridge Court when he was on leave and the family's Northumberland seat, Ravensgate, when he was on the continent. The third letter, dated the 8th of June, was the first to mention Wesley Park. It described, in the careful, patient prose of a man who had ridden over to look without my knowing it, the small, careful state of the south front rose border in the second week of June. The Duke had ridden through the parish on the afternoon of the 3rd on his way back from a magistrate's sitting at Stowe, and had paused at the lane below the park, and had, by his own quiet account, not gone any closer than the lane. He had observed, however, that the small coronet rose bush at the corner of the south terrace was in full bloom, and that the bees were in attendance, and that he had hoped, these were his exact words, that the small coronet rose bush would be the kind of small careful thing that, in the months ahead, would be tended by hands that knew what to do with it. He did not, in the third letter, name the hands. The hands, dear listener, were my mother's grandmother's. The bees, in the second week of June, were attended in particular by Imogen. The fourth letter, dated the 22nd of June, was the only letter that touched on Waterloo. It mentioned Waterloo in 3 sentences. The first sentence stated that the Duke had been at the Allied left flank under Sir Thomas Picton on the morning of the 18th of June, 1815. The second sentence stated that the small dent in the breastbone he had earlier mentioned had been put there by a French 8-pounder round shot which, by the small mercy of the regulation Royal Horse Artillery breastplate he was wearing under his tunic, had not gone through. The third sentence stated that he had not, in the 2 years since, ceased thinking of 2 young lieutenants under his command who had been at the Allied left flank with him on the same morning and had not, by the small mercy of any regulation breastplate, survived the second hour of the engagement. The names of the 2 lieutenants, in the postscript of the fourth letter, were Lieutenant Hartshorn and Lieutenant Pickering. The Duke wrote that he visited their families on his progress between Northumberland and Gloucestershire each year on the 18th of June. The fifth letter, dated the 6th of July, was the first letter that asked me a question. The question was, whether I would, at the convenience of my health and my father's, consent to receive him at Wesley Park for a single half-hour on a Saturday morning of my choosing, in the presence of my sisters and Mrs. Tannahill, on the matter of a small private piece of business he had been turning over since the 2nd of May, and on which he should welcome my opinion. I wrote back the next morning. I wrote that the Saturday following, the 13th of July, would be convenient if my father was in receipt of his physician's permission, and that if my father was not, the Saturday following that. The Duke arrived on the 13th at 11, on the lean grey gelding I have since had occasion to know well. The small private piece of business was a matter, the Duke explained, sitting in my mother's wing chair across from me with his hat in his right hand at his knee, of the unentailed remainder of Wesley Park having been, in the 6 weeks since his cancellation of the Vermeulen Pendergrass indenture, on the records at Stowe without any encumbrance whatever, and of the steward of the parish, old Mr. Allenby's elder brother, who served as land agent for several of the families of the Upper Cotswolds, Having approached the Duke through Stelvin Hartshorn, the country lawyer, about the possibility of the Duke himself lending against the unentailed remainder, on terms more favorable than the Vermeulen Pendergrass terms had been, in the simple amount required to bring the south front roof of the patent house into a state of repair which it badly required, and which my father, by the small careful inspection the Duke had on the previous Tuesday, made on his behalf with the rector and the rector's master mason from a position on the lawn that had not crowded my father's bedroom window, judged would be needed within the 18 months ahead. I read the proposal. I asked Imogen, who was at the keeping of the household ledger, what she thought of the rate. Imogen, whose head for figures had been cleaning the household's mathematics for 20 months, said it was fair. I said yes. The Duke had, by Mr. Hartshorn's quiet good offices, drafted the loan paper to require interest of 0%, payable on demand only at the moment Wesley Park should be sold, which, since the park was entailed, would never occur in my lifetime. The loan paper was, in plain English, a gift in the disguise of a loan. I noted this on the second reading. I asked the Duke whether he had considered that the disguise was thin. He said he had considered it. He said the disguise was as thin as the disguise needed to be in order to be accepted by a daughter of Sir Almeric Marchant Holloway. I signed the loan paper. The Duke folded it. He put it in his pocket. He said, before he stood, "Lady Verity, the roof has been arranged. The mason will be at the park on Tuesday. I shall not return until the second Tuesday after the close of the Hilary term. I shall, if you will permit it, write further letters at a fortnight's interval." The sixth letter, dated the 27th of July, described the first 6 days of the mason's work on the south front roof of the patent house, which the Duke had quietly observed from the lane below the park each morning before riding back to Wadebridge Court. The seventh letter, dated the 10th of August, was 3 pages and described his niece Helena's first solo ride on her gray pony on the lawn at Ravensgate. The eighth letter, dated the 24th of August, was 4 pages and contained the 7th paragraph he would later read me from memory in my mother's wing chair. The ninth letter, dated the morning after the close of the Hilary term in January, was the brief note about the Baron's verdict and the £2,500. The letters told me, never, in any of the 9, about my cheek. The cheek had healed by the 3rd of June, with no scar. The Hilary term sitting of the Court of King's Bench at the Gloucestershire Assizes opened on the 7th of January 1818, in the small panelled assize room above the old Shire Hall in Gloucester City, before the Lord Chief Justice's deputy on the Western Circuit, Mr. Justice Holcombe Tannahill, who had served the Western Circuit for 31 years and was, by every account in our possession, a man of small, careful patience and absolutely no humor about violence committed on a gentlewoman in a public place. The Crown was led by Mr. Augustus Hartshorn Yates, the senior King's Counsel of the Western Circuit, instructed by Stelvin Hartshorn, the country lawyer, at the Duke's quiet request and at the Duke's quiet expense. The defense was led by a Mr. Cordelius Vermeulen of the Inner Temple, a cousin of the Baron's by his late wife, who had, by every later account in legal circles, accepted the brief in the careful private hope of being able to settle the matter by an early plea, and who had, by the morning of the second day of the proceedings, ascertained from his client that no plea would be entertained because his client did not believe, in his own assessment of the 8-month interval since the May Fair, that any jury at Gloucester would convict on the testimony of a country gentlewoman of the family of Marchant Holloway against the testimony of a baron of 9 years' standing. The Crown called, on the morning of the 8th of January, 22 of the 183 witnesses who had been present on the village green at Lower Wesley on the morning of the 1st of May. The witnesses were drawn, on Stelvin Hartshorn's careful patient ranking, from every station of the parish: Mr. Allenby the rector, Mrs. Allenby, the smith, Mr. Owain Hartshorn Marchant, the Welshford master mason, The cheese stall keeper, Mrs. Adelaide Yates Pemberton, who had, against her husband's quiet remonstrance, clapped a single time at the moment the Baron's arm broke. The boy who had run for the doctor, the constable, the magistrate, the Pomeroy steward Erastus, who had not, on the day, been on the green, but who had heard the report by the 3rd hour of the afternoon from 3 independent sources. The cousin in Bristol's clerk, who had, to the Duke's own quiet satisfaction at the 3rd day's adjournment, driven down from Bristol to give evidence on the proceedings he had observed at Pendergrass Hall in early March on a separate matter of legal trespass. Each witness was examined in chief by Mr. Hartshorn Yates, in the careful, slow legal English of the Western Circuit Crown, and was cross-examined by Mr. Vermeulen in the careful, slow legal English of the defense. None of the witnesses, including Mrs. Yates Pemberton on cross, varied the account of the morning of the 1st of May in any material particular. The Baron, who was examined in chief by Mr. Vermeulen on the morning of the 3rd day, varied the account in 3 particulars. The first was that he claimed not to have struck me with the riding crop, but to have raised the riding crop in a gesture of dismissal which I had, in his account, walked into. The second was that he claimed to have been provoked by a verbal slur from me upon the memory of his late wife. The third was that he claimed to have voluntarily dropped the crop before the Duke's hand had touched his wrist. Each of the 3 variations was contradicted by the testimony of 7 of the previous 22 witnesses on the points the variations touched. The Baron's testimony, when read into the record by the prosecution on the cross, did not improve. I gave evidence on the afternoon of the 3rd day. I gave evidence in the small, careful voice my late mother had taught me to use in the bedroom of a sick child, and which I had, in the previous 8 months, found good for use in any room I had been required to be in for a thing I would have preferred not to be in for. Mr. Hartshorn Yates led me through the events of the morning of the 1st of May in the careful, slow, chronological order he had previously rehearsed with me at Stelvin Hartshorn's office in Stowe. I gave the answers I had given him in rehearsal. I did not embellish. I did not attribute motive to the Baron beyond the matter of the loans of October 1815 and the unentailed remainder, which I had referred to in plain language in my response to the 3rd question. Mr. Vermeulen rose to cross-examine. He asked me, in his first question, whether I had previously refused the Baron in private. I said I had. He asked me, in his second question, whether I had refused the Baron in language that might reasonably have been construed as insulting to the late Lady Vermeulen Pendergrass. I said I had not, since I had not in any of the 3 previous refusals so much as mentioned the late lady, who had died in childbed in 1813, and whose memory I should never wantonly slight in any conversation. He asked me, in his 3rd question, whether the matter of my refusing the Baron's proposals had been discussed by me with any 3rd party between the spring of 1817 and the morning of the 1st of May. I said it had, with my father, with my sisters, with Mrs. Tannahill, and with the rector. He asked me, in his 4th question, whether the Duke of Wadebridge had been one of the 3rd parties. I said no, since I had not laid eyes on the Duke of Wadebridge in 19 years. He asked me, in his 5th question, whether the Duke of Wadebridge had not, by his own evidence on the previous morning, been in residence at Wadebridge Court for 8 days before the May Fair. I said yes, but that the residence had not been known to me. He asked me, in his 6th question, whether I expected the court to believe that the appearance of a 35-year-old duke at the May Fair of a parish in which the previous duke had not been seen since 1798 was a coincidence. I said I had no expectation of the court whatever in the matter, but that the appearance had, on the morning of the 1st of May, been a coincidence by every available evidence, including the Duke's expression at the moment he had laid his hand on the Baron's wrist, which had been the expression of a man who had not, until that moment, expected to be required to act. Mr. Vermeulen sat down. He had no further questions. The jury retired at 4:50 on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The jury returned at 6:12. The verdict was guilty on the count of common assault upon a gentlewoman in a public place. Mr. Justice Tannehill imposed the sentence on the morning of the fourth day. The fine of £2,500 was the maximum the count permitted. The binding over for 2 years was, in the careful written reasons Mr. Justice Tannehill read aloud from the bench, set at 10 miles of Pendergrass Hall in order to permit the Baron's regular attendance upon his daughter Cordelia, who was then 9 years old and resident at Pendergrass Hall under the care of a governess and a small household. Mr. Justice Tannehill noted, in his reasons, that he had been pressed by the Crown to entertain a heavier criminal indictment for grievous bodily harm by intent, which would have carried, on conviction, a sentence of transportation to New South Wales for a term of 7 years, that he had declined to entertain the heavier indictment in this matter because the Duke of Wadebridge had personally requested the Crown, in writing, to limit the indictment to the lesser count, on grounds the Duke had laid out in a single page of careful prose to the Crown Solicitor, and which Mr. Justice Tannehill found to be reasons of a degree of moral consideration that the Western Circuit was not, in his 31 years of sitting on it, accustomed to from any peer of the realm, and that the matter was, accordingly, closed. The Duke did not press for the heavier indictment. He told me, in his 9th letter, the only letter that touched the trial, written the morning after the verdict, that £2,500 was the sum the Vermeulen Pendergrass barony could pay without breaking, and that the breaking of a man, when it could be replaced by the suitable shaming of a man, was not, in his experience, a course any officer who had broken men professionally would seek. The Baron was confined, by the additional terms of the binding over, to a residence within 10 miles of Pendergrass Hall for the period of 2 years. He removed himself, 6 months later, by his own choice, to Bath, where his health, I am informed, has been declining steadily. I have no further interest in the Baron, and I do not propose to give him further pages in this account. Augustus St. Vincent, 8th Duke of Wadebridge, called at Wesley Park at 3 o'clock on the afternoon of the second Tuesday, following the close of the Hilary term, in accordance with his promise of the 1st of May. He came alone, on horseback, on a lean grey gelding I have since had occasion to know well. He came up to the morning room and was admitted by Mrs. Tannehill, our housekeeper. He sat in my mother's wing chair across the morning room from me. He had brought, in the inner pocket of his charcoal superfine wool tailcoat, a single folded sheet of foolscap, and a small velvet pouch, tied with a silver cord. He laid the foolscap on the small mahogany side table between us. He did not open the pouch. He said, in the quiet voice he had used in the rectory parlor, "Lady Verity, I have come, as I promised on the 1st of May, with a particular question. Before I ask the question, I should like, with your permission, to lay out the answer in full, so that you may consider it without needing to have it read out to you afterward in the language of a settlement." He paused. He did not look at the foolscap. He looked at me. He said, "I am 35 years old. I am the 8th Duke of Wadebridge. I have a niece of 9 in Northumberland, my late brother's daughter, whom I have raised since her mother's death in 1814, and whom I propose to continue raising whether or not the answer to the question I am about to ask is yes. I have at Wadebridge Court, the seat of my house in this county, the income from estates in Gloucestershire, Northumberland, and the West Riding. I have, against me, the fact that I was at Waterloo, that I carry the small dent in the breastbone that came of it, that I lost 2 younger lieutenants under my command on the 2nd day at Quatre Bras, whom I have not, in the 2 years since, ceased thinking of, and that I have been, in the 7 months since the Mayfair, in your eye most of the time, without your having known it, because the Mayfair was the first time I had laid eyes on you, and not the only time I have laid eyes on you since. I have asked your father, in the 3rd week of May, for permission to ask the question. He gave it, on the conditions that I would press you with no haste, that I would not require an answer before the close of the Hillary term, and that, in the event of his death before the question were asked, I would observe a year of mourning in the matter. Your father is, I am thankful to be able to say, still alive at this hour, although his physician tells me he is unlikely to remain so beyond the spring. I have asked him, in the same week, for permission to settle upon you, in the event of yes, an unconditional jointure of £2,000 a year for life, regardless of his survival or mine, regardless of children or the absence of them, regardless of the circumstances of any subsequent disagreement between us. The settlement is in the foolscap. I have asked him also, against the contingency of no, for permission to assign in trust to your sisters Honoria and Imogen, jointly, the sum of £15,000 out of my private purse, payable on Sir Almeric's death, and not requiring any further communication between you and me. That assignment is in the foolscap as well. I have asked him, lastly, for permission to read, before I asked the question, a single brief paragraph I drafted in the 7th letter to you and did not send. I shall read it now. He took out the 7th letter. He did not unfold it. He read, from memory, at the speed of a man who has rehearsed the paragraph in front of his shaving glass. Lady Verity, on the morning of the 1st of May, when the riding crop was raised the 2nd time, and the Baron's mouth was making the sound it makes before it finishes a sentence, I had, by the count of 3 of the church bell's seconds, decided 2 things. The first was that the Baron was not going to bring the crop down a 2nd time. The second was that, if you would have me, I should be obliged to spend the remainder of the years given to me ensuring that the crop, in any form, is not raised against you a 3rd time. Neither decision has been altered in the 7 months between by anything I have observed of your bearing under duress, or of your sister's bearing under your charge, or of your father's quiet pride in the eldest of his 3 daughters. I am asking you, ma'am, to do me the honor of marrying me, and I am asking you, with the fool's cap on the side table, to consider, before you answer, that the answer will not, in any event, alter the sum I have already settled on your sisters, or the protection I have already extended to your house. The question is asked, ma'am, on its own merits. He stopped reading. He folded the letter back. He put it in his pocket. He took out the small velvet pouch. He laid it, unopened, on the foolscap on the side table. He put his hands flat on his knees. He waited. I sat in my mother's wing chair across from him, with the small steady rod of my late mother's spine in my back, and the small careful softening at the throat that had been growing in 7 months, and the small steady weight of a riding crop that had not, since the morning of the 1st of May, been raised across my cheek again. I considered, in the same way Imogen had considered when the Baron had first spoken on the green, what answer the question deserved. I considered the fool's cap. I considered the velvet pouch. I considered the small black mourning band still on his upper left arm. I considered the thin white scar from the upper lip to the corner of the jaw. I considered the niece in Northumberland. I said, in the small, steady voice I had been using since the morning of the 1st of May, Your Grace, Augustus. Yes. He took my hand. He did not lift it to his mouth. He held it, careful and steady, between both of his. He said quietly, I am very glad, Verity. Then he opened the velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was a small ring of his late mother's, an oval emerald in a fine gold setting with 2 small seed pearls at the shoulders. He slid it onto my 3rd finger of my left hand. The ring fit. He had, by the count of the 7 months, taken the measurement from a glove I had left, in the 2nd week of June, in the rectory parlor after the parish charity meeting, and that I had thought I had lost. We were married at the parish chapel of St. Aldate's at Lower Westley, by the rector, Mr. Allenby, At noon on Sunday, the 21st of December, 1817, with the Cotswold limestone of the chapel walls gone honey in the low, pale winter light, with the small round window above the altar showing a single narrow shaft of cold December sun across the altar cloth, with the small four-piece village band that had played the slow waltz on the green in May, playing now, in matching colored ribbon armbands, the Christmas anthem, while shepherds watched, at the proper, slow, careful tempo, and with 28 souls of the parish, every one of whom had been present at the May Fair in different stations and every one of whom had asked the rector to be permitted to attend, seated in the small high box pews of the nave. My father walked me down the aisle. He had been, by the morning of the wedding, raised from his bed by his physician's permission for the first time in 9 months, and he walked the aisle slowly on his cane, with his head up, in the careful, steady carriage of a baronet in the 8th generation of his line, who had, by the small, clean exertion of the previous 7 months, and the small, clean intervention of a Wellington-trained duke at a village fair on a morning of May, secured every one of his 3 daughters in the small, careful order in which a baronet of the 8th generation prefers his daughters to be left. Honoria walked behind me as the senior bridesmaid in a long-sleeved, high-waisted dove-gray cambric day dress with a small, darker gray silk ribbon at the bust. Imogen walked behind her in the same cut, in a faded apple-green cambric. Both wore the small white wildflowers Mrs. Allenby had fastened in their hair that morning. The Duke stood waiting at the altar in the perfectly cut, dark charcoal superfine wool wedding tailcoat I had seen him in once before, across his late mother's wing chair on the second Tuesday, after the close of the Hillary term. The buff casimere waistcoat with the single thread of dark green at the lapel, the white linen mathematical knot cravat, the dove-gray wool pantaloons, the polished black Hessian boots with the slim red welt, the small black mourning band still worn on the upper left arm. Beside him stood his groomsman, his cousin from Northumberland, Lord Pendergrass Yates, who had ridden down from Ravensgate at the Duke's invitation in the first week of December, and had stayed at Wadebridge Court through the wedding to escort, in the 7th pew on the left, the Duke's 9-year-old niece, Helena, whom the Duke had brought down from Northumberland for the wedding in his own carriage on the 18th, and who was that morning wearing a small high-waisted, long-sleeved cream wool day dress and a small green velvet ribbon, and the slightly nervous carriage of a 9-year-old who had been told, by her uncle in writing twice and in person 3 times since her arrival, that the lady the family was that morning to be welcoming into the court was a person of small, steady, careful patience whom Helena was specifically not, in any way, to feel, was a replacement for her own late mother. I had laid my hand on Helena's small, steady hand in the morning room at Wadebridge Court on the afternoon of the 19th, after we had been introduced. I had said, in the small, careful voice I had been using with Imogen since Imogen was 4 years old, "Helena, I am Verity. I am not going to try to be your mother. Your mother was your mother and will be your mother always. I am marrying your uncle on Sunday because he and I have decided we should like to keep house together, and you are part of the house we are keeping. You have, for 10 years already, had a perfectly good aunt by courtesy in Miss Yates Tannehill at Ravensgate. I should be obliged, in the months ahead, to be a second perfectly good aunt by courtesy to you here at the court, of the same standing." Helena had, after the count of perhaps 3 of the morning-room clock's slow seconds, said, "Yes, Lady Verity." I had said, "Verity." She had said, "Verity." She had not, in the 8 years between that afternoon and this hour, called me anything else. I had not, in the same 8 years, asked her to. The Mass took 38 minutes. Mr. Allenby read, in the slow, careful Cotswold voice he had used at my mother's funeral in 1815, the marriage service of the Book of Common Prayer of 1762, with the small, careful additions for a marriage during Advent, which the Cotswold rectors had used since the time of his predecessor in the 1780s. The Duke's voice, in answering the questions, was the same quiet voice he had used in the rectory parlor on the morning of the 1st of May. My voice, in answering the questions, was the same small, steady voice I had used on the trunk and at the work table, and in the morning room, and in the witness box, and on every other morning in between. My father, when Mr. Allenby asked who gave this woman, said, in a voice that was firm, "I do." He sat down beside Honoria and Imogen in the front pew. He laid his cane across his knees. He laid his right hand, very gently, on the back of Honoria's. He did not, in the remainder of the service, take his hand away. The Duke laid his late mother's emerald ring, which I had been wearing on the third finger of my left hand since the second Tuesday after the close of the Hilary term, onto the altar rail at the proper hour of the service, and slid in its place a single plain gold wedding band of perfectly modest design which he had, by Stelvin Hartshorn's careful description on the 18th, ordered through Mr. Hartshorn's son, the goldsmith of Stowe, specifically to be the ring of a baronet's daughter and not the ring of a duchess. We exchanged rings. The bell of St. Aldate's, which is the same bell that was rung at 3 in the afternoon on the morning of the 1st of May, to summon Dr. Pendergrove, was rung at 12:38 on the morning of the wedding by the same boy who had run for the doctor and who was now, at 16, 3 inches taller and rapidly outgrowing the rector's livery. The Duke and I came out into the south porch on his arm. The villagers in the box pews followed us out. The Duke's carriage, with the De Winter ducal crest on the door, was waiting at the gate of the churchyard. We rode the 4¼ miles up to Wadebridge Court for the wedding breakfast. He died on the 2nd of February, 1818, at home at Wesley Park, in his sleep, 2 days after the announcement of my expected confinement, which gave him, the doctor told us afterward, exactly the news he had wanted to receive. The cousin in Bristol presented himself to take possession of the entailed estate on the 3rd of February. He was received by Mr. Tannahill, our housekeeper's husband, who had been promoted to butler the previous October, and who saw him out within an hour. The cousin has not visited again. I am, as I write these pages, in the morning room at Wadebridge Court, 25 years old. The cut at the corner of my mouth from the morning of the 1st of May has not left a scar. The Baron has not approached me since the closing of the Hilary term. Pendergrass Hall has been, by the courts, transferred to a trust for his daughter Cordelia's benefit. The unentailed remainder of Wesley Park is held in trust for my sisters Honoria and Imogen. Honoria is to marry Mr. Allenby's curate in the spring. Imogen is in residence with my husband's niece in Northumberland, where the two of them have, with my husband's encouragement, established a small school for the daughters of the parish. My husband's niece, who is now 10, is the elder sister Imogen has not had. I am, by this hour of the day, expected to keep my feet up on a small footstool by my own hearth, on the order of the same physician who attended my father, and I have, in the spring, the small further task of presenting my husband with an heir to his title, or, should it be a daughter, with a young lady whom her father intends, from the day of her birth, to teach to ride a pony and read Latin. If you are anywhere near where I was on the morning of the 1st of May, with the riding crop coming across your cheek, and the Baron's mouth in the small, careful curl of contempt that is the curl of a man who has decided you will sign, I will say only this. The man at the rectory pavilion, in the perfectly cut dark charcoal superfine wool tailcoat, with the small thread of green at the lapel, and the polished black Hessian boots with the slim red welt, and the iron-gray eyes that are neither cold nor warm, has, in this country, been there a longer time than you knew. He has been on the continent for 12 years. He has buried, in the 8 days before the fair, an uncle. He has, in the 2 years before that, buried 2 lieutenants. He has the small dent in the breastbone. He has the niece in Northumberland. He has, in the second pocket of his coat, the velvet pouch with his late mother's emerald ring sized to a glove you left in a parlor you had forgotten leaving. He will lay his right hand on the wrist of the Baron at the moment the crop is rising the second time. He will say, in the quiet voice that the village will tell its grandchildren about, "My lord, the lady has refused you. You will lower the crop." He will, in the silence that follows, do what is required with no visible exertion. He will, 6 months and 3 weeks later, sit across from you in your mother's wing chair with the fool's cap on the side table and the velvet pouch unopened, and he will read the 7th paragraph of the 7th letter from memory, and he will ask the question. The question will be on its own merits. The answer is yes. The riding crop will not be raised a third time, the cheek will heal without scar, and the ring will fit. I drive up to my own door at Wadebridge Court in the slow afternoon light. The bell rings the 4th hour, the fire takes on the first match. The wind moves cold and high in the elms above the carriage drive, and the door, the great oak door of the court my husband's family has held since the 17th year of King Henry VIII, opens.